Now we can look at creating the trims for the door and window heads and sills, and I'll show you some tricks on how to do that. So again, it doesn't really matter how elaborate or simple the trims are. Again, maybe I'll show you some examples of something being a little more elaborate than what's here. I'm actually going to group these two together because I'm going to deal with the head and sills simultaneously. And I'm going to make a copy of this one over just because here I want to show you what it looks like if we do something a little more elaborate. Nothing too crazy, just putting something different, just to show you that it's really the same process. So really what I would want to do is I need this to return, not just go straight across, meaning it's not simply just going to be a push pull and go across. There would be a 90-degree return that happens on this trim. So when it is a little more elaborate, just doing something like this, note that I'm not paying any attention to real distances or anything like that. I just need to get a U-shaped line going for this to follow. I'm going to let it follow, and I'm going to push this back in. And typically I would come in here and clean these lines up, but I actually want to leave them for right now because they're going to be helpful to me in a second. And I can just move this back to the wall. Again, I'm going to hide my model, go to X-ray mode, and I want to grab it by this line right here. Get out of X-ray mode, and I'm going to slide all the way over. And so you can see why I had that line, because that's going to be my extension, so I know that I could be uniform wherever. And so there you go. So there's a quick basic detail for a trim. Now there's one additional piece that I typically do, and again I'll show you why that I actually add one additional piece to this, and to do that, looking here, if I come in here and let's paint this, we'll do some bright color, add colors, just painting it red. Typically the way you would want painting to happen is this trim color would slide up here, but you can see that we would have to paint this red and then come in here and paint this red just to get that to happen. So what I typically do is I'll take this and I'll slide it down just a ½ inch just to make things a little easier for me, and then I'll come in and draw this rectangle, and I'll pull this out 2 inches, and now I can get rid of these because this now acts as the reference points that I need. And so now that you see, by having done that, I really get a nice return, and it really creates a nice material detail that keeps the window clean, especially if you have side trims that happen. Again, you would really do the same thing, let the trim return back to the frame, whatever, and this way you're getting the side painted the way the trim would, instead of just ending up the same color as the house. So that's a little trick when it comes to trims, especially anything that's a little more elaborate than a simple rectangle. So with that said, let's put our rectangle back, and this time, since it is a rectangle, I really can just do a simple push-pull, but I'm just going to slide this back 2 inches because it's really happening is it's a rectangle, so it's going to make our lives very easy. So really it's the same thing as having the rectangle, running it out and then pushing everything in the way I had just previously done. And so let's move this down again, our ½ inch, and we'll slide these lines in 2 inches, and we will slide this line up ½ inch, and we'll pull this out 2 inches. So that gives us a nice trim, or excuse me, a nice head detail that we can now paint and let the material return. And I would rebuild this the exact same way, but knowing that these two really are identical, minus the it's 6 inches instead of or 4 inches instead of 6 inches. I'm just going to copy this down, and let's explode it, and we'll pull this up 2 inches. Now I'm actually going to explode this too. I typically leave everything as solid groups, as we've discussed many times, but the advantage to letting this kind of be its own group and not individual groups is I can paste this over here, and again I can copy this one here, and I can now slide both of these over at the exact same time, which makes it a lot easier to edit both of these simultaneously. What I didn't do, and I really do want to do, is make these their own group. I like keeping the windows their own group, which works out really well. So I can just continue copying this around. Again, like I said, I like keeping trims as their own group, so maybe I'll come back here and grab our original banding that we had done in a previous video, and we'll paste that back in place. And similar to the way we talked about materials with roofs, I generally like to paint on the surface level any materials that would go on, but what works well, typically trims are almost always going to be the same color, so if they are different, then just kind of be aware of that. But what's great is I can just grab a color and select everything and paint it, and so and really I could even just paint on the outside. If I click one trim, it paints all the trims, since the trims are grouped together. So that's a great way to make things easy to work with. So again, if you want to change, the trim color, maybe get something that's very different. We grab a green. It's very easy to change the trim colors to look at some different options. Actually going to get rid of these. I don't need them. This little button here, this arrow, you can see has purge unused, so it gets rid of any materials I'm not using. It's very similar to pressing I for model info. If I doesn't work, it is just window model info, and it brings up this box here, and under statistics you can do purge unused, and that'll do the same thing. It'll get rid of any materials as well as layers and components that simply aren't being used. And so now that we have this built, really doing doors and windows would be, doing doors based off of windows, the same thing. I just want to rotate this over 90 degrees, and then we will slide this over to my door, let's say, and we will actually copy one to my window. As you can see now, if I come in here and edit, I can just quickly grab both sides of it, zoom in and slide this over, and both my head and sill update the exact same time. Now there are times where it doesn't make sense to do this, but most times it typically does. So I'm in here, I'm not going to have a sill trim on a door, so I can just delete that one out and grab the pieces I need and slide this over, and there you go. There's my door trim. I have that window, and let's just copy this one over, and there you go. So this is my preferred method. It is slightly more time consuming initially of doing every window, because really the other method that I can show you, and there are some advantages to this one. Let me move, actually I'm going to hit Control X, which is going to cut the trim out of that window. I'm going to erase that trim, erase this one, because I know these are all the same windows, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to edit this window. So as you can see, these are all the windows that are the exact same size, and what's nice about this is I can actually hit Control-Shift-V to paste in place, and you'll see that instantly every one of these window instances now has a trim added to it. So that works really well as well. The disadvantage again is when it comes to adding materials, as we were just talking about, where these trims are part of my trim package. I can paint the trim package whatever color I want, where these trims are actually part of my window package, and I would have to come in here and paint each one of these. Now I can paint this and all of my every instance of that window updates, but I'd have to do that for every window type. And if you only have, say, 3 or 4 window types, it's not a big deal. It's just more of something to be aware of. So really, it's just kind of showing you 2 methods as to which this can be done. So I'm going to go ahead and finish adding the trims around my doors and windows, and I'll show you the finished piece. So something to note that I just came across as I was working on finishing all the windows, I was going back to my method of keeping my trim package and using all the trims in there and adding trims to every window individually. Another thing to be aware of, again, if I were to have cut this and put it as part of this window, you can see that this window, it would get both the head and sill, where coming back out in reality, this sill does not exist on this window. And so the only way around that would be to make this window, or any window like it, which would be, you know, these series of windows, you would have to make these unique so that you can eliminate the bottom trim, which now defeats the purpose of having these windows as components. If you need to update this window, then you'd have to update this window. So again, there's really pros and cons to just the way things are done. And it's not to say that one way is right and one way is wrong. It's just wanting you to be aware of what's going on. So where now I can come in and just eliminate that sill piece and just let the head piece be up there for this window. So again, I'm going to go back and finish the rest of the windows and show you the completed piece. So here you can see the completed version. Only took an extra couple minutes to add in the trims around the house. So you can see that the house is really starting to come alive, and that really the concept of building in SketchUp is just building, you know, layers upon layers, attack each piece as you need to, and it really all starts to come together very quickly. Create something that's very very realistic in showing off the design. So that's door and window trims. We will look at adding brackets and rafters next.